This is a production of O'Brien Communications.
Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien, and this is the Shaping Opinion podcast. Our guest today is Ingrid Jacques. She's a columnist with USA Today. What caught my attention from her was she wrote a column recently about those late night comedy shows. More to the point, she wrote about the firing of Stephen Colbert and what it means to the whole genre of late night comedy. That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, Ingrid. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. I love the column that you wrote recently about late night comedy, and there was something that really launched the whole thing. Now, for background, if anyone hasn't been paying attention, Stephen Colbert was fired from CBS, but he's still on the air there, and that sort of launched this whole debate about late night TV, why he was fired. Some people say it was political, but a lot of people and the network has said it's a business decision. So there's that. So the main thing that CBS has said was the show itself, the Stephen Colbert, Late Night with Stephen Colbert, that show was $40 million in the red. It cost $100 million to produce every year, and it's it's losing $40 million a year, and that's what they said. So I wanted to start off by bringing up that quote from Jay Leno that you wrote about in your column, and we'll look at that here, and I wanted to use that sort of as a launching point. So what Jay Leno said for the audio listeners is, I like to think that people come to a comedy show to kind of get away from the things, the pressures of life, wherever it might be. And I love political humor, don't get me wrong. But what happens is people wind up cozying too much to one side or the other. Why shoot for just half the audience? Why not try to get the whole audience? That's pretty much where you started with your column. What kind of feedback have you gotten on that? And what kind of nuance, I think, needs to be added to that statement?
Well, I'd say the typical kind of feedback I get when I write, which is half the people hate it and probably half agree with me. So, and the people who hate it seem to be a bit more colorful in their language. But I'm sure you're kind of in the same business. I'm sure you're aware of how that goes. But this is something I've been following the last few years as someone in the media business. I find it very interesting that for many years, there's sort of been this, almost this tunnel vision, this one point of view that's kind of become the accepted point of view. And it's ostracized a really large part of the country and led to a lot of distrust in the media. And when you're dealing with comedy, I think that's kind of its own thing. I'm not a comedian, but I know what I think is funny. And so many of these late night shows, I just feel like they've lost their humor because they've become less about making you laugh and kind of de-stress from the day and almost amplifying that stress and that consternation. And I think that's what...
Go ahead.
I think that's what Leno was speaking to, that you can still talk politics, but have fun with it. And after a long day, you've been at work, reading the headlines, you just want to relax a bit. And the American people are not dumb. They know when they're being preached to, and I think they were tired of the lectures that were coming from Colbert and all these other folks.
Ingrid, I just have a question because I'm a huge fan of late night comedy, or I always was. I had a favorite show. Growing up, I watched Johnny Carson.
Okay.
He was my favorite show. Did you have any favorites when you were growing up or over the years?
Sure. I mean, I'd say I was a fan of the Letterman show. I also watched Leno. Those were the real standbys at that time. And I'd have to say, since then, it's been much less consistent that I've watched these shows, in large part because I didn't really care for the direction they were going. And also, as I got older, I have a hard time staying up that late. So a lot of times now I just catch the clips from, the shows the night before. So I still follow what's going on, but I don't regularly watch anymore, to be fair. What made me interested in the Colbert story was just more the bigger trend, the bigger media trend that, most of these network shows, even most of the cable shows, except for Fox, are really aiming for one half of the country, and that's the more liberal half. And it's just not a good business model.
Do you think, let's look at that from a business perspective for a second, because we've had the dynamic of streaming come in, and basically, so you had broadcast TV, which was overtaken by cable TV for the most part.
Sure.
And now cable TV's seriously threatened, if not already destroyed, by streaming. And
Right.
So you have streaming now, and you have different demographics because TV is now TV on demand, content on demand. So you mentioned clicks and shares. I mean, most people probably see these late night shows when they hit on their social media feeds than they do sitting
Right.
down with, they used to call it appointment TV when you'd sit down at the hour that the show was on,
Right.
and that seems to be a generational thing where baby boomers and maybe older Gen X might still count on sitting down at a certain time. But below that age, most people go with TV on demand, streaming. So my question there is, do you think the producers of these late night shows, and you mentioned they're sort of going more liberal or political that way, do you think they're doing it because they think it'll bring in the younger audience, or do you think they're doing it in spite of whatever the data is telling them?
I mean, I think they're trying to figure it out in real time, much like the newspaper business that I'm in. We're constantly having to pivot in how we're getting to our audience. But as I brought up in the Colbert column, CBS tried to say this is, it's not just the late night show. It's just a kind of a problem with that genre overall. And there are a lot of other stations seeing lower viewership numbers, but I brought up the Gutfeld show on Fox as a counter to that, which is seeing a growing audience, and he's typically got 1 million more viewers per night than Colbert, who is the second highest. So I think there is an appetite for that format. People are tuning in. Gutfeld did move his show from 11 to 10. So maybe you're getting a few more people who are, who don't have to stay up quite so late to watch it. But I think, people still want to tune in and watch a show they enjoy. I think where Gutfeld has a real corner on the market is he's really the only one that's on the more politically conservative libertarian side, whereas everyone else, you kind of know what you're going to get. Like the Colbert show, there was a Newsbusters report as to his guests in the last 2 years, I think, and 176 were definitively on the liberal side, and there was only one Republican he invited, and that was Liz Cheney. And I think a lot of conservatives might not consider her the typical Republican these days. So I mean that gets old when you're so focused on this one point of view. You will ostracize people. And I think Colbert, I thought when he did the Colbert report, he was funny. He was really funny. And I just think he became much less so in this new show. So I think that was unfortunate.
It is, and it's a shame in a way because comedy is subjective. So I've talked to different people over the years, and they'll talk about when Saturday Night Live was funny. And depending on the age of the person you're talking to, they'll either talk about Chevy Chase and John Belushi, or they'll talk about Eddie Murphy, or they'll even talk about people more recent than that. So it depends. But a lot of people did find Saturday Night Live funny, but when they look at the current version, however old they are, they always find that version not as funny as the one that they remember. And it's probably
Sure.
the same with these, as you said. When I think about when I would watch, when I did make a habit of staying up and watching some of these shows, and I did it for many years. It was exactly what you said. It was, you had the day that you had the maybe it was a hard day at work, maybe it was something involving family, maybe it was just watching the news and seeing the serious news that you've been hit with all day long.
Right.
And I always thought it was kind of funny that when a late night comedian like a Johnny Carson or a Jay Leno or a David Letterman, when they could make fun of the headlines. So what their message to me was, it's not as dire as you think. It's what you heard today in the news, because I'm making a joke about it right now. So it's not all that
Right.
bad, and it helps you put things into perspective. But I think what you're saying is some of the late night hosts these days are rubbing salt in the wound. Would that be a way to describe it?
Yeah, I think so. And just not being funny. I mean, come on, President Trump should be comedy gold if you're looking to make fun of the daily headlines. I mean, he's got lots of material for these guys, but it's like they can't see, they can't do their job and make you laugh. Like they just want to double down on how Trump is a horrible person and he's destroying America. I mean, that's kind of the essential theme, I think, that was going on. And that's why Leno made an excellent point in just, that's not what people want to hear in this format. Like, make them laugh, and make them laugh across the board, So yeah, it's just such a missed opportunity, because there's, I think we all need to just let loose a little bit from time to time. And I think these shows were increasingly not letting people do that.
There's one clip that just came to mind for me, and it wasn't directly political, but it was, I looked at it as a low point for late night TV, and it was Stephen Colbert. And when I say low point, it was because I just couldn't believe it went against the character of irreverent comedy, and comedy is always funniest when it's attacking those sacred cows in society. So it is fun. Like, if President Trump is the president, he is fair game. So
of course.
And so was Joe Biden and whoever. But also back during COVID, it was that one skit that Stephen Colbert did where he used a play on word. He spelled vaccine VAC and then a hyphen and then SCENE, and he would just basically openly promote people getting vaccinated. And there was this one skit where he had dancing syringes and people like that, and he made and I looked at that, and it was just, it was almost like it was silly and it was ridiculous, but it was also almost as though because his whole tone was, if you even question the vaccine, we're going to laugh at you, we're going to mock you. That was sort of the underlying thing with his humor there. And it was almost as though, to me, some pharmaceutical company actually paid for that, or the CDC sponsored it, or the FDA, not the FDA as much, but it almost looked like he was working on behalf of an interest as opposed to just trying to entertain. I don't know if you remember that skit, but
I don't remember that particular one, but that doesn't surprise me that he did that.
I'd play it here if I could. For copyright reasons, I can't. But but yeah, it was just one of those skits, and I thought, whatever happened to comedy where we could, step back and kind of make fun of this instead of help it along and promote it, and almost implicitly ridicule the audience that doesn't agree with us. And I know you said that with political reasons, but that wasn't political. That was, or you could say it wasn't political, but it was really had to do with people making personal health choices, and he was sort of making fun of those that didn't make the choice he liked. And I saw that. Well, let's talk about one other person here, because she weighed in, and she's definitely not what you might consider conservative. Okay, let's remove Jay and bring Samantha Bee into the mix here. Samantha Bee had a show on TNT and TBS, and this is what she said about the whole Colbert thing. And again, for the audio listeners, it definitely was hemorrhaging money. These legacy shows are hemorrhaging money with no real end to that in sight. People are just not tuning in. So she didn't really offer as much of an analysis from the standpoint of why and how, but she did in her comments basically say, look, this is a business and people aren't tuning in. They're not getting ratings. So you got to do something different, and you have to get other people in there, and you don't have to keep spending money you were spending. So she was sort of shaking her head in a sense, saying, I'm sure Stephen understands that. What do you think about that? I know you mentioned Gutfeld. Gutfeld is a far cheaper show to put together than the other shows that you might see on NBC, ABC, and CBS. Is it time to go with a whole different format and a whole different lower budget approach to this? Or do you think it's really boils down to the content and the people delivering the message?
I mean, I would say it's about the content and I mean, all these companies, CBS, Fox, they're businesses, and obviously they have to make the best decisions for their bottom line. And something that caught my attention was the very political reaction to Colbert's show getting canceled. You had politicians like Elizabeth Warren, Tim Walz, just wringing their hands that there must be some conspiracy behind Colbert's show getting canceled because he had recently, because of his comments about Trump, and he kind of pointed fingers at CBS's settlement with the president. I sincerely doubt these same elected officials would care whatsoever if Gutfeld's show got canceled for some reason. They'd probably applaud it. So the fact that Colbert has these huge supporters on the far left, I think says a lot about his political leanings. So that's something that caught my attention too.
I found it interesting that after all of this happened, Jimmy Fallon, who was not, that was that show was the king of late night forever, the Tonight Show. And now Jimmy Fallon is the heir apparent to that. And who does he bring on right after all of this? He brings on Greg Gutfeld as a guest. And I heard his ratings really went up for that particular show.
They did. Yeah, that was that was.
So Gutfeld brought an audience to that, and I know that's the key, not only on late night TV but on podcasts and other shows. Is they'll. In fact, I'm a PR guy by trade, and I told a client not too long ago what I know now is when you get on certain of these shows, not so much as you said newspapers, but when you're talking about these big shows, these big podcasts. The producers of those podcasts want to know if the guest or the potential guest has a big social media following.
Sure.
And they'll base it on that. And so if you look at Joe Rogan, his podcast, and you look at his guests, most of those guests are going to come in with a strong social media following. Now, he can afford to make people famous because he's already famous, but other ones will do that even more carefully. I wanted to bring in the ratings now for late night TV because I think, if you haven't been paying attention to late night TV, here's what the ratings were for late night TV at the end of June. Colbert was number one at 2.42 million viewers per episode per night. Jimmy Kimmel was number two, he was number two at 1.77 million per night. And Jimmy Fallon was at 1.19, almost 1.2 million. And these were the three people that competed head-to-head at 11:30. The Daily Show on Comedy Central, now that's just cable, 900,000. And Seth Meyers, who comes on later in the evening at 12:30, he had 900,000. Greg Gutfeld, you mentioned him. He's on Fox. and his listener or viewership was 3.29 million. So Colbert was one at 2.4. Gutfeld is at 3.2 million. So he's got over 1 million viewers, and he's just on Fox Cable. He doesn't have a live studio audience. He doesn't bring in the big name celebrities the way these other shows do. And as you mentioned, he moved his time from 11 to 10. So I'm sure that helped him, but there's a big difference there. What do you?
A very big difference, yeah.
Yeah, and all of those numbers are actually small by comparison to some big podcasts. So, what would you say about the shift in media right now? Is it ever going to come back where you'll have more than that?
I wish I knew the answers to where the media business was going, because trust me, I think about it a lot, especially with AI coming on the scene. I wonder how much longer I'll be employed when EBT can write a pretty good column that kind of sounds like me in 2 seconds. So, yeah, I don't know where it's going, but I think much like there's always going to be a demand for news, for well-reported news, well-reported opinion. I think people are going to want news programs that they like, and they'll want comedy shows. And whether that's just streaming only, or it looks a little bit like the networks now, I don't know. I would just assume things are going to keep shifting, but the overall demand for that kind of content, I think, will be there. It's just maybe the way in which it's delivered will vary. So
yeah.
But I think I still think the product there's a demand for it and it's important. But yeah, I mean, when you're getting, like we were talking about years ago, when the shows that we liked watching, there really weren't that many options. You could watch Letterman, or you could watch Leno, and in your case, Carson. But now there's so many different things competing for our attention, whether that's the traditional shows out there, whether it's YouTube, all these podcasts. It's getting, there's just a lot of choices, a lot more choices. So to stand out, you really have to be reaching your intended market exactly how you want. But yeah, I'd say it's just going to keep getting more challenging in this shifting media environment.
Well, there's one person that also has come up recently in the same vein is Howard Stern. Now, Howard Stern was not late night TV. He basically he was one of the kings of radio, shock jock, and his whole thing was pushing the envelope, pushing it past the envelope, crossing the line that you're not supposed to cross. He did it. He appealed to young men, mostly. That was his demographic, young, late teens, early 20 men. And he would do something on the radio every day that would get people talking by the time they got to work. Then he moved over to Sirius satellite, and that was a sort of transformative deal, and he made a ton of money over the course of the years. Now, recently we find out that Sirius is not renewing with Howard Stern, that Howard Stern is not, that his time is up. And I guess my question is about that pushing the envelope, because that used to be one of the keys for some people to get attention, is to be outrageous. And you would even see it with late night TV to get people talking, or even on comedy shows like Saturday Night Live. And you still have some of that where people try to come up with these clips that will go viral on Monday. So my question for you is that really a good formula anymore? Because it just seems like people push the envelope so much, there's not much left to push, is there?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. You see other people constantly reinventing themselves successfully, like Megyn Kelly. She went from Fox to network news. That didn't last very long, but instead of just giving up, she just started her own show, which I believe is on Sirius. And she is doing really well. Huge audience, very loyal to her. So I think she's someone that's been able to go cross platform and do it successfully, just through the power of her own brand. I was never really a fan of Howard Stern's show, so I can't really say why, his audience might be falling off. But I think there are ways to build your brand, stay successful, regardless of whether you're doing it on YouTube or Sirius versus the more traditional platforms. But to get to the point where Megyn Kelly is, she's obviously worked for years to build up just that loyalty to her. Her audience trusts her, and I think they'd follow her wherever she went. But then there's also been all this attention to people like Joe Rogan and these other, like, largely male podcasters who a lot of people think helped sway the November election, because they reached this demographic of especially young men who were looking for a different kind of message. And to Trump's credit, he went on all these podcasts, and and that, I think, turned out to be really smart, because he could have just been like, oh, I'm not going on some dumb podcast that he'd never heard of, but he was all about it. And he reached millions of voters who might not have considered him otherwise. So, I just say, I think it's just really going to depend on the media personality, and whether they can make that venue successful. But I'm open to what works for these different people. Like, I think what Joe Rogan did, it's hard to replicate, right? I mean, Democrats are like, they've just put together that whole $20 million work group on how to reach young men, and they're trying to figure out how they can get their own Joe Rogan. And you can't just create that. Like, I mean, I think those things have to happen organically, but it's definitely an interesting cross section between what's going on politically and what's going on in the media landscape.
I think one of the interesting things you mentioned, the Howard Stern. I was never a listener of Howard Stern's. I just didn't. That wasn't my cup of tea, sure, as far as his humor. But for some of these people and some of these podcasters, like you just said, they were going for a young male demographic for some of these things, and they got it. So it was that same demographic. But you wouldn't think that a political guest, like a candidate, would be something that young men would be interested in unless there was something else going on. And I think Joe Rogan kind of tapped into that and came to represent it. But he wasn't alone. There's another comedian, Theo Vaughn, right, who also had Trump on. And then there have been other comedians, and some of these comedians don't have, well, they do have podcasts, but they don't have Trump on. I think of Shane Gillis, who also has a podcast, but one thing that a lot of these people have in common that the young men kind of found resonating with them was that these people that are the media people that they're watching and listening to were canceled, or there were attempts to cancel them. So Joe Rogan, back during COVID, there was a massive attempt to take him off Spotify and cancel him, right, because of what he did. And Shane Gillis had been canceled years ago, and he came back stronger than ever. And I think what happens with some of these people is after they go through that sort of life experience, right, they just sort of don't care as much, and they'll basically poke their finger in the eye of whoever the authority is right now. And that seems to resonate with young men typically, but maybe young men too. Maybe they just felt that they could identify with this because of their own mindset at this point. Have you seen much in terms of that in your own coverage of the media and politics?
Well, I mean, something I've paid attention to is just, I think there's been a real, just focusing on men, and especially young men, there's been kind of a demonization of men, especially white men in our culture. Whether through the push for DEI, some of these other things. And I think it was just they were looking for a place to go to find a community where they didn't feel ostracized and disrespected all the time, and like second-class citizens. And so I think that's part of the appeal of folks like Rogan and Theo Von. Like they were kind of speaking to that audience. But just you mentioned Theo Von, and it just made me think of his interview with Trump. I listened to it. I wasn't really all that familiar with Theo Von, but my brother had mentioned, hey, this was a kind of interesting interview. So I listened to it, and it was one of the most, I think it showed a side of Trump that I hadn't really seen before. Just a real compassionate side. He was really asking Theo Von serious questions about his struggles with addiction, and because Trump had, obviously he's had issues with that in his own family. That's why he will not drink any kind of alcohol. And it was I thought very eye-opening, and I wouldn't have thought maybe a comedian like Theo Von would be able to kind of break through Trump's facade. I think it's very hard to do. Even in Rogan's interview with Trump, it was 3 hours long. And I could tell Rogan was trying to get Trump to go a little bit off script, or to get him to really focus on a few things. And Trump just wanted to talk about what he wanted to talk about. But there was something about Theo Von that really showed a different side to the president. I found it fascinating.
Well, one thing I like about both of those podcast formats is they are such long podcasts. So we often talk in the media about talking in sound bites, 30 seconds, and
Right.
then stopping and repeating a message over and over again. That's somebody who's going through some kind of media training will do that. And when you see a lot of your news coverage, that's what you see. You see people on camera, or you hear them, and they're well-trained people that know how to stay on message. But
Sure.
when you do a 3-hour podcast with a host like Joe Rogan or Theo Von, you're going to have to break script, I guess you could say, break message.
Sure. Yeah.
You have to be real. And that's really the only way to connect with people is to be real. And I think that's why Joe Rogan does a 3-hour show, because even the most hardened media personalities after an hour of interview are going to start to loosen up, and he'll
Sure.
go in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing too is that the fact that they're both comedians, and the comedians have done well in this because they're used to sort of challenging assumptions, challenging the status quo. So when it's amazing to me that some of these comedians are actually better interviewers than what you see on these news shows on these same networks.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I've noticed it too, and maybe to be truly funny, I think you have to have a lot of empathy for what people are going through, and just for the human condition, because you're making people laugh about things that are often very painful or difficult. So you kind of know how to get to the heart of the matter, maybe in a way that others don't. And comedy in itself can be disarming. And so, I think you put those things together, and it makes sense to me why that would lead to interviews of more depth, because you're going below the surface a bit more to maybe what makes people tick, what they're really thinking about, and why.
I have a question for you about the media business. I know you're in a newspaper, one of the biggest newspapers in the country, but I also know that most newspapers have online sites, but that's just the beginning. They have their
Sure.
own podcasts, and their people, their columnists, become what they call now influencers. So they have their own sort of media platforms. They start with podcasts, they do video. There may be frequent guests on cable TV shows and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I don't know, and you can tell me, is what's the position of news organizations like USA Today? Do they encourage it? Do they expect it? Do they mandate it? How do they feel about doing more than just the written word with the people that they employ?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a big push to be on these different platforms, to do more videos, social media videos, things like that. And what I've tried to do is, when I can do an interview with someone on video and include that in my column, I've found that to be a way to get a little more interest in what I've written. But I'm old-fashioned. The reason I got into this business was I like writing, and that's my preferred medium. So that makes me a bit of a dinosaur in this business. But I do think readers appreciate the written word and well-argued piece. So I hope there's a demand for that for a while, because that's what I enjoy. I mean, sure, I'd say TV, video, those formats are probably the most powerful as far as brand building and developing an audience. There's just something about that reaches people in a way just writing cannot. So sure, we're always being asked to do more. Like, I know my editors would like it if I did TikTok videos, but I don't want to go on TikTok. So I'm just going to try to do it my way for as long as I can. I'm on Twitter, or X, and I try to stay active on that, but
that seems to be the platform, X, for people who are in the media. But to your point,
it does. But as far as reaching the younger generation, that is more TikTok. They're probably even using things I don't know about. But that's where, if you see surveys, that's where the younger generations get their news, from watching these social media videos. And when I hear that, it's kind of discouraging. But at the same time, that's the reality. So, and I have to figure out how to reach that audience. Luckily, we have very talented internet folks on our team that help turn our columns into things that can go on Instagram and some of these other platforms. So I really appreciate their work, because honestly, I don't love doing that.
No, it's a whole different skill set. One thing that is encouraging, I think, first off, with what you just mentioned, writing, Substack is growing. And the reason Substack is growing is because people are embracing the long form written stories. Investigative reporters are doing great work. And there's a common theme there too. Some of the people that are on Substack who are doing so much great work were canceled, or they were fired from their jobs, and they did these things. So even though they're still writing, it's not the issue that writing isn't popular, because people are still consuming long form content. But they weren't able to do that at their, Barry Weiss is one of the more obvious ones. She has a Substack called The Free Press, and she used to work for the New York Times. So you had that. But then you also have these, as you mentioned, TikTok. And again, this is sort of encouraging if you're someone who cares about the news, but it's not really encouraging if you care about the news business. And that is, you can go to, and I personally made the decision not to use TikTok because I'm a fanatic about privacy on the internet. And
exactly. I don't want China spying on me.
Exactly. And but I have used it, and I have, but even TikTok will branch out into Instagram posts or X posts. You'll see a lot of stuff that originated on TikTok in these places. And, but the thing about TikTok and X and some Instagram and even some YouTube is you will see video of stories that the media won't bring you. So you will see. So I remember in the early days of the Ukraine war, and that was really a tough one to deal with, because so much of that video supposedly coming out of Ukraine, you could see they were fake or they were staged, and and it was the same on Russia. It wasn't just one side, and so you have the info wars basically going between the two warring parties, Russia and Ukraine, and that happens all around the world now with these big developments, not just wars. But there are certain filters, I guess, in the American media. So they're not getting access to certain stories, or they're not getting access to certain raw video, and they can see it now thanks to TikTok. The problem is they'll see that right next to a dancing doctors, and things like that. So it's a real hodgepodge.
Talking cats. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And I think something else. You're right. I think you can find true stories, true footage there, but it's also alongside a lot of things that are not true or are just very misleading. And when it's all presented in that same format, I think it can be hard to decipher, what is real, what's not, especially with AI getting as advanced as it is. Some of these things, it's pretty shocking how you can just create photos, videos, things that aren't real but look real. And so I think that's something that we're going to have to really navigate in this business. And part of that will be, those of us who are in the legacy media or built up brands on Substack or whatever, just to really build trust with their audience, so that if you say, hey, this video that's gotten so much attention on whatever social media site might be really compelling, but it's not accurate. But there's so much distrust right now in the media as a whole. I think people are kind of hungry for these alternate views where they're feeling like they're getting the whole story, not just the side that the mainstream media wants you to hear. So I think just the media in general needs to really work on rebuilding that trust. And that's something I appreciate about what USA Today, Gannett, our parent company, is doing. Like, they're, at least on the opinion side, which is my side of the business, they're really making an effort to broaden perspectives on the opinion teams. And that's something that wasn't necessarily the case even 5 years ago. So I respect that. And I think I've seen similar trends at other newspapers. Just realizing if we're going to be reaching the whole country, which is a smart business decision, you need to have a diversity of viewpoints. There's been so much focus on diversity of a certain kind, but not what I think is the most important diversity, which is just of your views, of your background, things that really can appeal to the whole country. So they came to me as I was a writer on the editorial board at the Detroit News for many years, and where we were a more conservative editorial board. So USA Today came to me and just say, hey, we want more perspectives like yours. And I really appreciated that. I was a bit worried that I'd get hired and then get canceled immediately, because it's like, you might think you want a conservative, but do you really want my views? But my editors have been extremely supportive and have had my back the whole time. So I really appreciate that.
I have a question for you about that. You're online and you're in print, and it's harder to measure print, but it's easier to measure online. Mm-hmm. Do you get the data on your work to find out clicks?
Oh, of course,
how many people
yes.
are clicking on it? Sure.
we're very into those metrics. So last year was a banner year for most of us on my team, which is typical in an election year. And I've been in the business about 20 years, and I can't think of any year that was more newsworthy, especially last summer. It was just one wild story after another, from what was going on with Biden and dropping out of the race to Trump almost getting assassinated to it was just one thing after another. So that certainly helped with our page views. But, I'd say, looking at the numbers, there is a real desire for different viewpoints. So we have another full-time conservative columnist now on our team. And, we're both some of the top page views on our team. So I think that speaks to what people are wanting to read around the country, and they appreciate getting more than just one point of view. That's
true. And that reinforces again what we talked about a little while ago with Greg Gutfeld going on Jimmy Fallon, that there isn't a market out there for that. That's why Fox News does what it does. And it's not necessarily an ideology. I think that's one of the mistakes people make when they look at Fox News and the Murdochs. Right. People want to say, well, they're ideological. So if you're a conservative, they'll look at them and say, well, they're on our team. Or if you're a Democrat or a progressive, you'll look at them and say, well, they're not on our team, they're on the other team. Right. But when you look at the Murdochs and you look at all their media enterprises, they're on the business team.
Of course.
And they know what sells.
Of course they are. And they're right. And there's a reason Fox is so successful. It's far outpacing CNN and pretty much everyone else. So, right, they've made smart business decisions. And I think on Fox, like you said, there's a lot of assumption. It's all ideological, but I don't think that's true. No, their news programs, I think, are pretty fair, and they certainly have opinion shows, and they do what they do, but they're at the top for a reason. And I think some of these other networks would be smart to maybe learn something from what they're doing right.
Well, and you can carry it over to the Wall Street Journal, which they own.
Sure.
The Wall Street Journal always has been before the Murdochs and still is dominant. And
Absolutely.
But the reason it is that way is because again, they know what people. You don't necessarily give people just what they want to see. Sometimes you have to tell them what they need to hear.
Right.
But
sure.
They do a good job balancing that. I want to go back to something you said and use an example. You talked about AI before, and people falling for certain videos. And I can tell you, I've seen this video. I almost fell for it myself. And then I was talking to two family members 2 separate times, and they both fell for it. Mm-hmm. And it was a video of Donald Trump in a room with Putin. And you see Donald Trump pull a chair out so that Putin can sit down, and then he slides the chair in. It looks very realistic. It's fake. It's an AI video made. But people look at that, and you'll see that video even now coupled with news about the summit that they had recently in Alaska. And people are believing that video is from the summit in Alaska. They don't have no idea that it was an AI video. Right. And I look at AI as being very primitive right now in terms of what it is versus what it's going to be someday. So it could be very easily used to manipulate people and fool them. And I wonder, your take as a journalist. And I'm a First Amendment person. So does First Amendment cover AI, or does there have to be some kind of a regulation or anything, or maybe it's a disclaimer where if you post something that was AI driven, you have to let people know this was AI, something like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I no question. I think we have to be extremely transparent with our readers, viewers. I mean, there have been some newspapers that have gotten in trouble just in the last few months for using AI and not revealing it. Like there was one syndicated piece, like the top 10 books for the summer, I think. I forget where it originated, but from a well-known paper, and it ended up being like half the books were just completely made up by AI, and they sounded kind of interesting, but they just weren't real. And the fact that got into print, that no editor just Googled some of these titles to find out that they weren't real, I thought that was pretty bad. But this is slightly different from that, but related. I recently wrote about former CNN reporter Jim Acosta's interview with this AI version of the young man who died in the Parkland shooting. I don't know if you saw that.
I did see that, and I don't know how to say what my reaction was, because it was a mix of things. I felt like repulsed by it, scared in a way, because this is the future,
Right. No, I had a very visceral reaction too. And it's not like Acosta was trying to say, he was upfront that this was what it was. But at the same time, the language he used in describing the interview, equated it with talking to a real person. He said in the intro, like, this is the first time we're hearing from one of the victims of a school shooting. And, it's like, no, we're not. And it was very disturbing to me. And, I say that, and this young Joaquin's parents created this AI avatar of him, from video of him, from things he'd written. And I have complete empathy for their desire to do this and keep their son with them in any way that they can. But I see it very differently from the side of what's the media response to something like this. And I think it would have been a fair interview just to talk to the parents about this avatar and how they hope, to how it helps them in their grief, or maybe how, because they clearly want their son to have a voice in other platforms. Like the father said that he wanted his son to be on debate stages, things like that. And as you said, as AI gets more advanced, these things are going to be more realistic, more easily accessible. But it's also troubling to me that we could be integrating things that are not real with real life. And I think we in the media business have to be extremely careful about how we move forward with that technology. And I think just being 100% transparent is the first thing. But that's an interesting question about the First Amendment. I just think there's going to be so many questions that we're not even thinking about yet about where this is all going. But I've written about this before. I'm personally I'm not a huge fan of AI, because I just see it taking over what I do. I'd like to think that opinion journalism would be safe, but I don't know. I mean, it's way cheaper to have a robot write a column. Even heck, the LA Times has something on their opinion website right now where if they run an opinion with one perspective, like, you can hit a button at the bottom and it will spit out a counter argument through AI. And that's one of the most major papers in the country. So I see that, and I worry about my future as a writer, but I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can, because I love it.
I think the interesting thing about that, I was talking to someone who's an artist, and there's been research already done on this. You can have the most beautiful art in the world created by AI, much more vibrant and beautiful than a human hand can do. But you have more people these days who will buy a painting from a human, and there's a psychological reason for that, I've been told. And that is that as beautiful as the art is, that's not what people are paying for when they're buying art. they're paying for that human connection. They want to feel that they want to get inside the head of the person that painted that. What's the story here that person was thinking when they painted it,
Right.
and all the other things. They want it's the human experience that's shared between the artist and the consumer of that art, if they will look at it or buy it.
Right.
And I think too, then you talk about AI in other ways, like you when you were just talking there, and I just wondered about with columnists like you, it's the same thing. You can get another opinion in 3 seconds from AI, and you can tell it how many words you want. I wanted to read 1,000 words on the Ukrainian deal, and it will give you a very well-reasoned argument. And if it doesn't hallucinate, it will have all the facts in it. But you also want to know, you want to have this connection with the person that wrote it, I
Sure.
think. And I think there's that other issue of empathy that you mentioned, Theo Vaughn. A columnist or a pundit, they can empathize with the people that they're communicating to. And
Sure.
even the best AI, by definition, cannot empathize, because it can say empathetic things, because it forms the world, basically the internet, to produce empathetic sounding words and sentences. But it can't be empathetic because it's a machine. And people, that's where I think there's that line, don't you?
No, I do believe that, and I would like to think that there's still a demand for that. And I think it makes me feel a similar way to seeing that the interview with the dead Parkland student. It's kind of troubling to me when I've experimented with Chat GPT. Like, it can spit out a pretty decently argued piece in really the voice of whoever you ask it to do, but it's not real, and there's just, I think it's very clear that human element is missing, and there's something disturbing about that. But I mean, it's kind of going back to how it's all affecting our business, where we have seen page view drops because, like with Google now, you Google for something going on in the news or something you want to read about, and now it's just summarized by AI. And sure, there's little links to where they're pulling that information from, but a lot of people are busy, and a lot of people just kind of want to know the nuts and bolts, and they're not clicking through like they used to be, like when you just Google something and just the individual links would show up. Now you can pretty much get a good feel for the situation. That's all being pulled from, I'm assuming, most pieces written by real people, including me. So I mean, that we're going to have to figure out that. So do we just have to put everything behind a paywall so AI can't use that in its search results? I don't know. I mean, these are all things we're going to have to figure out.
Oh yeah, and I think that's what the media organizations are doing, and there's those copyright issues and everything else. I want to go back to that Parkland story because I want to make sure that the people who are listening or watching, if they haven't heard the story, and I'll just summarize it. Jim Acosta used to be with CNN. He has his own podcast now, and it's a video podcast. And what he did was, he did two things, actually. He did the interview with this AI bot. Okay, that's what he actually did, factually. He interviewed an AI bot that was programmed by some third party and approved by the parents of this dead child. So this kid died in the Parkland shooting. His parents, obviously, I can't imagine how they feel. And so I would, as you said, I would want to do the same thing. I'd want to do anything I could to keep his memory alive and feel that connection. Now, they discover AI and they come up with this thing, and they have these positions on everything like gun violence. Now you have Jim Acosta come in to the picture, and he says, "Wouldn't that really?" And I that's how some TV people are. They wouldn't that be cool if I could do this? I could interview this person, and I'd really make a name for myself. I'd get some attention. I think that's part of it for Jim. I don't want to say I can't read his mind, so I don't know everything he's thinking.
Right.
but I know what he said. And that's the other thing he did outside of the interview itself. He said, I interviewed one of the students who was killed in the Parkland shooting.
Mm-hmm.
He did not interview anyone
Right.
who was
Right.
killed
Exactly.
in the park. That's a lie.
Exactly. Right.
And
That's what bothered me most about the whole thing was how he framed it.
yeah. And that's, I guess when I said, how did I react? I was repulsed that he would do that. It was so
Right.
gratuitous
Mm-hmm.
and cynical.
Yeah.
And he did it, in typical fashion, I think, for him. But then when you watch the interview, you could see that it was as close to realistic as I would have ever expected it to be, although that didn't necessarily look like how that kid might have looked today.
Right.
And he's had that robotic sound to his voice. And his answers to all of Jim's questions is almost like the whole thing was pre-scripted by somebody else, and it had nothing to do with how this kid might feel if he were alive today. It had everything to do with having this AI bot deliver certain messaging against, in this case, it was gun violence, but it could be programmed for anything.
Right.
And you could do it on either side. You could do it, if you're pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, you could do the same thing. You could create bots. You could create historical figures and do interviews with them and support your argument that way. Or you can find victims like Jim Acosta did in this case and make the other point. I just find it somewhat, for lack of a better word, sleazy. When you see that, because it's because these people aren't here to speak for themselves. And at the end of the day, I think that's the line. I don't know.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And it just seemed to me like Acosta was trying to get more views on his new show. And I mean, maybe there's more to it, but it just seemed very, very poor decision on his part, and kind of trying to capitalize on this family's grief. So, like I said, I don't blame them for wanting to keep the memory of their son alive any way they can. But as someone prominent in the media business, someone like Acosta, to frame the interview like he did, like you said, like he treated it like interviewing a real person, and that was absolutely not what was going on there. So yeah, I think that's a good example of what not to do with AI in media.
I just have one more question for you, and it's more, and we started off talking about late night comedy, and we morphed into the media, which I appreciate you doing and being willing to talk about all these things. But going forward, and going back to late night TV, is there something that I guess you would look for as a sign of hope for late night TV, as far as getting back to entertainment, getting back to taking people's minds off their daily routines? And if so, really, what would it take in your mind?
Well, I think we're getting a feel for what people don't want and what's not working. If later night shows do make more of a comeback, I think we're going to see possibly a different format, maybe different times. And I hope maybe more of, we started with Leno's quote, just that you get back to wanting to make everyone laugh, not just a certain part of your audience. And I think that kind of approach would really revive the format. And I think whether you're trying to make people laugh or you're just trying to reach people to help them think about something differently, like I do, it's just all about diversity of perspectives and realizing that half the country feels strongly one way and half the other. And I think we can still communicate with each other when you go about it the right way.
Ingrid Jacques, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
The Shaping Opinion podcast is a production of O'Brien Communications. Copyright O'Brien Communications 2025. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like to watch, go to YouTube, Rumble, or our Substack page, shapingopinion.com.